David was different. In a world that prized loud opinions and quick judgments, he was the quiet one, the one people often overlooked, mistaking his silence for weakness. He worked in a bustling office where his colleagues constantly pushed to be seen and heard, vying for attention and approval. But David never played that game. He knew better. He knew the power of stillness, the strength that came from waiting for the right moment. People misunderstood him, though. They laughed at him behind his back, calling him the fool who never speaks. They couldn't comprehend how someone could choose silence over speaking up. And David, he let them laugh. He carried the weight of their judgments quietly because he understood something they didn't. Silence could be a weapon far sharper than words. The tension in the office had been rising for weeks. A make-or-break business deal hung in the balance, and everyone was on edge. The boardroom was packed, filled with managers and executives all trying to prove they had the answer. The air was thick with frustration as ideas were shot down one after another. The clock was ticking, and desperation began to seep into the room. David sat in the corner, unnoticed as usual. He wasn't part of the loud arguments or the chaotic brainstorming. His colleagues were too busy talking over each other, too consumed with the need to be heard. They didn't see what he saw. They didn't realize that they were missing the most important details. He watched as tempers flared, voices rising, everyone scrambling to save the deal. And all the while, David's mind worked in silence, piecing together a plan, understanding the problems that no one else saw. Suddenly, his boss slammed her hand on the table. "Enough!" she shouted, glaring around the room. "We're getting nowhere." Her eyes landed on David, a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "David, you've been sitting there quietly this whole time. Don't you have anything to say? Or are you just going to sit there and watch us fail?" The room fell silent, the tension now thick and palpable. Everyone turned to look at him. Some smirked, expecting him to stay silent. Just like always, they expected him to freeze, to prove once and for all that their judgment of him was right, that he was the fool they thought he was. But David didn't freeze. He didn't panic. He had been waiting for this moment. Slowly, with calm confidence, he reached into his bag and pulled out a notebook, worn from weeks of careful notes and planning. The room was still as he flipped it open, his movements deliberate, unhurried. Eyes followed his every move, disbelief creeping into their expressions. David's voice, when it finally came, was steady. "While you were busy trying to be heard, I've been listening," he said, his eyes meeting his boss's. The room was eerily quiet now, the air thick with anticipation. "And here's what we've missed." He began laying out the problems one by one, pointing out overlooked details that had been drowned out by the noise. His words were precise, each one a sharp contrast to the chaos that had filled the room moments earlier. He didn't just talk, he gave solutions. Solutions no one else had seen because they were too busy arguing. As he spoke, you could see the change in the room. His colleagues, who had mocked him, now leaned in, hanging on every word. Their faces shifted from disbelief to awe. David didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to fight to be heard. His silence had been his strength, and now in this crucial moment, it was clear that he wasn't the fool they had thought him to be. He was the one who had truly understood the situation all along. As he finished, the room remained silent. His boss, who had doubted him just moments earlier, now looked at him with a mix of admiration and regret. She nodded slowly. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" she asked quietly. David smiled, a calm, knowing smile. "Because," he said softly, "sometimes silence speaks louder than words." The deal was saved that day, and with it, David's place in the company changed forever. No longer was he seen as the quiet fool. He was the one who had seen what no one else could, the one whose silence held more wisdom than their loudest arguments. Moral: True power often lies in silence. When others fight for attention, the one who waits, watches, and listens carefully will ultimately rise above. Silence is not emptiness, it is preparation. And when the moment is right, that silence will confuse and amaze those who never saw it coming. Have you ever witnessed the strength of silence? Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds all the power. What do you think? Does silence speak louder than words? Let me know your thoughts.